Today we would like to talk about Sam Bingham Community Cares Initiative, the little history that brought us today and what it means to GEM. The Community Cares Initiative was introduced last year as a permanent component of the GEM workshop activities. The intent is that together with the plenary sessions and the focus group activities, the Community Cares Initiative will be the third and equal component of the GEM summer workshops. We see this as an umbrella event under which we can have events that represent the community. Back in 2018, we had the first event that focused on the community. It was the microaggressions event. It was the result of a community effort that was trying to acknowledge that we are not perfect and that only when we talk about our issues, we move forward. The next year, we organized under the Underrepresented Minority Lunch event where Paul Kazak led an engaging and productive discussion on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In 2020 was the first COVID year. Together with everything else that came with it, our community was shocked by the passing of our dear friend and colleague, Sam Bingham. As the reaction to this loss, we came close at a time when everything else was drifting apart. The participation during the virtual events that took place right before and during the virtual workshop of that year was overwhelming. It was clear that we were more than just honoring Sam's memory. We needed to support each other. Sam brought us together. We vowed to work hard to reach out to each other, to ask the simple question, how are you today? We started the Support Each Other Slack channel that became a forum for the community to share their experiences and resources. In preparation for the 2021 virtual workshop, it was becoming clear that the GEM Steering Committee was committing to the community. And the more we learned about Sam, the more we realized that he personified all that we wanted to do in our community. Inclusion, kindness, caring, wide interests, standing up for others were his trademarks. And therefore, the Sam Bingham Community Cares Initiative was established. Last year, we had the SBCCI Bystander Intervention Training, the SBCCI Plenary Tutorial on Psychology Topics for Scientists, and the SBCCI event on mental health in academia. In the virtual GEM Gather Town, we had spaces for the SBCCI Support Each Other, SBCCI Queer Beers, and the SBCCI DEI. This year, under the same initiative, we had the Speaking Up training, the DEI tutorials, and the best ever queer beers ever last night. For the future, we always welcome any ideas for new events and volunteers to host them. Today, we are honored to have Sam's parents, Sarah and Thomas. During the most difficult time of their lives, they were there to support us first. They followed us all the way here to be together with Sam's science family and friends. We thank them. And now, Thomas, if you'd like to say.
I did test negative for COVID. Yeah, I don't quite know. Got some notes. Chris had sent me the text of that beforehand, and I wouldn't be able to speak if I hadn't had some advance knowledge of what he was to say. But you know, being here is sort of like inviting a fire department into your house. You know, people will say to you, actually this did happen to us, because my mother's house burned up. But they said, well, we understand the fire department did all kinds of damage. They sprayed water all over the place and they made a mess out of your house. And aren't you upset about that? It's like, no, not upset at all. Because that's what we invited the fire department to do, was to come in and support us in our house. And it's sort of like being choked up today. We invited you guys essentially to be here with us so we could be choked up and feel your support. And your support was fantastic. Someone said to me a couple days ago that that this was a memorial, and it's kind of interesting because I didn't really think of it as a memorial. We had memorials 2 years ago, and really what I think this is the way Alan and Chris have envisioned this as the community cares, and it just has Sam's name attached to it because he was a spark for having a unified events to talk about community. I don't know how many of you saw some of those memorials that we did online a couple years ago, but the outpouring from Drew's call to action was really stunning to a lot of people. And you guys are creating your own community of action, your own community that you want to work in. And that's really, as I understand it, what Alan and Chris and people are thinking about with the community cares thing. It's like, how do we create the community that we want to be created within? How do we want to support each other? And what kinds of science can we bring in to support us in supporting each other? So it's community care, connection within people, connection between people, and connection within community. And if you think about that, it's really a very encompassing way of looking at the world. It's not a violent way, it's very non-violent, but it's also very proactive. Because what you guys have been doing is really proactive to support each other, learn from each other, and it's really exciting to see you guys do that. So its question is what's lost from what's lost, what needs to be restored, and whether you call it restorative justice or restorative practices or the kinds of things that Stephanie was talking about on Monday with the diversity training, the speaking up. You could think about what is spiritual rejuvenation. How do we affect that? How do we affect harm? How do we make our lives, our environment better? And it's connection. Very simply connection. And that's what the Community Cares initiative is how do we foster connection? How do we scientifically, how do we organize it to foster connection? So yeah, I mean, this thing got going because of the outpouring of you guys among yourselves about the things that concerned you about community. And it was sort of expressed through Sam's death. But it's a wonderful expression of what we can do as a group, what we can do as a small scientific community working together. Stephanie talked about small acts. Mike talked about small acts on Monday. He gave the example of small papers that don't get much recognition, which are really interesting. Small things that people do. He talked about Rosa Parks having been trained scientifically to do community action. And what he didn't mention was the hard work that went into that kind of training. She was part of the Highlander Center training in Tennessee. Highlander Center was closed down and seized. The property was seized by the state of Tennessee for their affirmative action. 3 years ago, their main building was burned down, perhaps by the same people that orchestrated Charlottesville. So these things don't happen by accident. We can be a very proactive force to make life better for ourselves and as a community. So Jim is special, and you guys are creating your own environment. It's wonderful. Stephanie's skits, they told a story, talked about facts. But underlying that was the meaning of what those things meant to us, our values, our sense of being, our sense of community, our sense of connection. And that's really important when you think about it. There are these two parallel things. There's the story, and then there's the meaning of the story. And we were over at the Bishop Museum this morning, and there's a display about their planetarium, which is kind of interesting because it draws in the science that you guys are working on. It's astronomy, but and the Polynesian, the micro Polynesian system of navigation. And as European descendants, we like to think of measurements and figures and things like that. And of course, everybody navigates by the stars, but the Polynesians have a very accurate way of navigating by the stars. They were left out here in the Pacific by themselves, or they got into the Pacific by themselves. And so it's how the stars rise across the horizon that'll tell them their latitude. And they can do it extremely accurately. But it's not just measurement, because they speak in metaphors. They speak about the meaning of where this stuff is. They talk about the flow of the waves, the great waves, the mild waves, and the wind, and the birds. And this gives them a sense of where they are on Earth. And lo and behold, excuse me, they're accurate within 5 miles of where a GPS would have them. It's pretty incredible. I mean, but that's the meaning, I think, of merging science with well-being. Using science to validate what we do as human beings. Beware of a lot of folklore. There's a lot of folklore out there about how we should live, but you guys are fortunate because you live in the age of brain exploration. You know, the science of what goes into the brain, how we act, how we think, how we approach fear. Is a science, and it's now understood. You know, Freud was a what do you call the word? A neurologist. He's a neurologist. But he said the brain was far too complicated, so he just made up a lot of stuff. But today, we actually can look inside the brain. We know how we work as community. We've got a good sense. We can use science to make a better community. You know, and stress, you got to worry about stress, especially in this profession. Stress can be fun, like roller coasters. I mean, it's life-saving if a lion's jumping out in front of you, but it's also a killer if it's long-term. So we have to be very cognizant of how we deal with stress in the scientific and the academic community. And stress shows up in all kinds of bizarre ways. I mean, a woman who is stressed during pregnancy can turn off up to 4,000 genes in her fetus. Turn them off. They don't disappear. They just turn off. And usually they turn off permanently. So stress can change us in really weird ways. It's not just, you know, heart conditions or things like that. It's you know, what we eat is important. So use biology, use neuroscience to create a better community. You know, it's connection within people, between people, and as community. Support each other. Take care of yourselves. You know, Sam and I were on the Serengeti 12 years ago. And it's really kind of neat to be where we as people originated in our brains, in our neurology. This was the environment in which we grew up in, evolutionary speaking. And it's not like it is on Nature Movie. Everybody is out there together. The lions, the antelopes, everybody's out there together. We're all milling around. And the Maasai are out there with their spears and their 1,000 head of sheep and goats and cattle, and their Chinese-made capes. And they're building, they have their own community. They have a sense of community. They have a sense of what works. And there's nothing that divides us from the guy with the spear. In fact, the elders don't have email addresses. The young ones do. College education. So what drives a Messiah community to be connective and supportive of each other is the same thing that drives us. Their ability to organize themselves is the same thing that organizes us to look at all these different satellites we heard about this morning. So, don't be fooled by being effective or efficient, because a lot of times our brains do things which are effective and they're efficient. But the real question is whether they're optimal for our well-being, because it can be efficient and effective, but it can also be suboptimal. So we want to look at things about how we can live our lives and create an environment in which we can work in, which is optimal, not necessarily effective. Well, should be effective, but remember, being effective doesn't mean you're necessarily optimal. So, connection within ourselves, between ourselves, and as a community. It decides what kind of environment we live in. And you guys are doing that. It's wonderful to see. You're the future. Imposter syndrome, you know what? It's normal, it's natural, and it's a good thing. Because if we stand up in front of our peers and are worried about how we were going to perceive, that's a natural danger. Not a problem. It's how we deal with those problems that make it either optimal or suboptimal. So, unfortunately, I think Sam maybe took us suboptimal. Nope. Flip the page here. Anyway, Viva Community Cares Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Would anybody else like to come up and say any words? The mic is open if anyone would like to.
Jake and I just met for the first time about 3 minutes ago. So.
Can everyone see and hear me? Okay, I wasn't really prepared to make any comments, but I'll say a couple of words right off the cuff, and I'll try to keep it together. Please excuse me if I don't. So I was just reflecting as Thomas was speaking. Okay, I really will keep it together. As Thomas was reflecting, I was reflecting on the name, the Sam Bingham Community Cares Initiative. It's kind of a special name. I'll just break it down real quick. So Sam Bingham, he was a young student. He was a co-focus group leader with me on the SCIM session. I always used to joke with him because my first son is named Sam and he's got curly hair, and I always used to, say he was like the grown-up version of my little Sam. We formed a focus group together. Sam tragically took his life at the beginning of COVID. I remember getting a call. It was not pretty. It's an example of what happens when one of us is lost. Okay, next part. Community cares is a reminder that we are people first, and we are a community that cares for each other. And science is actually better when we are a community, when we're a strong community. My best debates and the best science comes out of strong relationships, when I know people well and I can debate them hard, and we're still friends. And those are the bonds that work well in a community and they work well in science too. And the final word is initiative. I really like that word because this is our stake in the ground. It says that people come first, people matter. And initiative also means that we don't just assume this, we actually are proactive. We take initiative. That's why the Sam Begum Community Cares Initiative is something that is a stake in the ground. It should stay. It should be a reminder that we're proactive and we're constantly keeping this in the front of our minds, and we're reminding ourselves to put people first, to put community first, to keep educating ourselves as we have with various sessions and meetings. And that's why I'm such a big fan of this. I really commend Adam, the steering committee, Thomas, and yourself. And it's a wonderful initiative. I hope that it makes us all stronger and better as a community. And if there are any issues, if there are things going on with people, there's a safety net. I hope that is great.